I am excited to be here. Everybody excited for Harry Potter tonight? If you haven't been there, I'm telling you, it's really cool little land they have. So I'm pretty excited about that. We get to rent out the whole thing, I guess. That's pretty awesome. That part of the park, anyway. So for those that don't know me, my name's Whalin, and we're going to talk about, well, a little more command line type stuff. Which, if you're using the CLI, you're like, great. But if you're not, you might be like, what do I need that for? So we're going to talk about Docker and how, when you build an app, ngserve is awesome, and you can, quickly serve up the app. But what if you want to develop against a real server, nginx, HA proxy, or others? We're going to talk about how we can do that and some of the other challenges, not only with development, but how do you deploy the app? Now, for a lot of us, that means we deploy it by just copying some code over. We're good. But is anybody doing microservices by chance in here at all? Okay, quite a few of you. Anybody doing Docker so far? Okay, a few of you. Excellent. So I'm a big fan of both Angular and Docker. Pretty much everything I do nowadays, I use these Docker containers to not only develop, but also deploy. And that's what we're going to talk about here. So the information I'm going to show you, I'll leave this link up really quick. You can get to this link right here. Don't kill the internet for me because I'm going to need it. But we'll let everybody try to hit it here if you'd like to get to that. All right, so when I first got started with development, it really wasn't a goal to be a developer. I was about 14, and I got one of these for Christmas from my grandpa. Actually got it for our family, which was, I looked it up, and investment-wise, it was a big investment back then in what this thing cost. And pretty much to be honest, at that age, I used it for a game called Congo Bongo and Wizardry. I don't know if anyone remembers that. Some of you in here are going, man, he's pretty old, isn't he? But the nice thing about this world is I learned a little bit of scripting. And, I didn't know it back then, but that's kind of how my career sort of got started. And we would move code around using this rock-solid option right here. And anyone that's used these, I love, notice up here it says 5 1/4 mini disk. Yeah. And, nothing ever went wrong with these, of course. But, it was pretty easy. You just put some code on there and move it over, and you could have your scripts. Then, of course, the web came out a little bit later. If anyone was around back in these days, you might remember Mosaic. This was the good old days. We didn't even have JavaScript back then. And, when it came to coding, we had these phenomenal editors like Hot Dog Pro. Anyone remember that one? Or Homesite was another favorite a little bit later in the 90s I had. But, when it came to deploying code, it was actually pretty straightforward. I used to use WSFTP, and if you haven't seen this, on the left, that'd be my code. On the right, that would be my server I'm trying to target. And we'd hit a button, and we're done. And that's how simple it is today, right? Not exactly. In fact, Stephen in his talk just kind of walked through that a little bit. So today, unfortunately, we have, well, fortunately and unfortunately, fortunately because we have very distributed, very flexible, very scalable systems. Unfortunately for us sometimes and DevOps, we got to get not just code, but security settings, server versions, environment variables, and you name it needs to go with this code in order for it to run successfully. So sometimes our deployment processes, it kind of feels like loading up a boat like this, and you hope it doesn't sink before it gets to the other side, right? And I won't ask for a raise of hands, but how many have a deployment process that pretty much sums it up? I think as developers, I'm sure we have, anyone do DevOps as well in here by chance? Okay, we have a few. So you'll be a little more armed and dangerous for that side of it. But us as developers, I think we kind of feel like this kid right here, like, I can do this. I can do this. Wait. No, I can't do this. Thanks, Julie Lerman, for the video, by the way. And that's kind of how it feels. So, in today's world, it's not just as simple as deploy an Angular app, done. We need a way to actually move other servers as well. So, for instance, we might host Angular in my favorite way to host it is nginx. Many options. If you're not familiar with nginx, it's open source. There's a free version and an enterprise, of course, but it's a version that is a reverse proxy, and it usually sits on port 80. It's a very, very high traffic type server. So in the enterprise type world where you do get a lot of traffic in some cases, then you'll have this type of server or HA proxy or others. Now, that, of course, needs to get data from somewhere, so we'll typically have our RESTful services somewhere. Now, this could be Java, it could be ASP.NET Core, PHP, Java, I said Java, .NET, I said ASP.NET Core, Node.js, that's what I'm looking for, Node.js. And these servers then, of course, are hitting different databases. We might have caching servers, and it gets a little bit complex now. So being an Angular developer, it's awesome because of the CLI and what the framework offers, but when we go to be real world, it gets a little more challenging. ngserv isn't going to cut it. And that's what we're going to talk about is how do we answer these questions? How easy is it to get all these services running, not only on your local machine, but also in staging, QA, test, whatever you call it, and production. And I think some of you agree this can be challenging. And then another question we can ask here is, how do you deploy all of these services? And how do you make sure they actually run? So let me run a really quick demo here. And I'm going to use a little Docker tool for an app I have. And this is where we're going to hit a little command line. So this is actually, there'll be a link to all this stuff a little bit later for you at the end, if you're interested. But this is where I'm going to do some microservice type stuff. Now, I'll admit this is a very simple microservice example. But I'm going to get up, I think it's 5. I'd have to double check what my container count is. But I think it's about 5 containers. And I'm going to go ahead and run a command here. And just as easy as that, I'm going to be able to run an entire real-life system on my machine. And this will take a sec to build the first time. And what this has is ASP.NET Core, and that's going to hit Postgres. It has Node.js hitting MongoDB, so kind of the microservice type thing where you have different teams. And then I have Angular hosted inside of nginx, and nginx is then going to call into these RESTful type services. So let me see, it's getting close, it's almost done. Let me go ahead and, all right, there we go. Now it should be ready. So I'm going to run off to just localhost. And all right, now it's not a super impressive Angular app at all. You'll see here that I just have some customers and filtering. It does have server-side paging. So that is actually calling a Node.js service, and then we also have some ASP.NET Core being integrated. But it's just a regular Angular app. But now I have these microservices going. And what's so cool about this is these are running inside of a container. Now we're going to talk about what is that. What is a container? So now I literally could move this to any server, any cloud, in literally, if I'm set up with an account, in a matter of potentially 30 seconds, 60 seconds, depends on how fast to move the images actually. And that's what we're going to talk about here. All right, so let me stop that now. And we're going to be as if nothing ever happened here. So I'm going to do a little command here. And we're going to stop. OK, now all these containers are gone. Now, while we're here, before I introduce Docker a whole lot, what do I have going on to make this work? Well, up here, you're going to notice a little whale icon. They actually have some pretty cool art in their website and stuff. And this whale icon, this is called Docker Community Edition. It's free. And then there's also a Docker Enterprise, of course. And what this will allow me to do is, in essence, put my code, all my server stuff, environment variables, security, you name it, everything in a container. And I'll have a little visual here to make this a little more obvious. But you have to have this installed to make it run. Now, if you're on Mac, you do Docker CE. If you're on Windows 10 Pro or higher, you can do Docker CE. If you're on Windows 7 or 8, you can do what's called Docker Toolbox. It's a slightly older one that uses VirtualBox, but it still does the same things. Still works. All right, so now let's take a look at what Docker is before we go much further here and start running some commands. Let me go ahead and stop this guy. Okay, so now what we're going to do is let's discuss, let me get past that again. Let's discuss how Docker can help here. And again, I won't ask for a show of hands, but how many people ever have deployment problems? Probably maybe a few of you from time to time. How many people takes like 2 days to deploy a simple change? I know of several companies where it's more like 3 days actually to get a simple change into production. So part of that's process, of course, but the other part is there's just a lot of moving parts in our systems these days. So what Docker can do for us is provide these containers. And you can think of a container as everything goes in there that we need to successfully run the app. Now, with like WSFTP, the example I showed earlier, you're literally just moving files. Okay, well that's like what? 25% of the story? You know, I mean, code's one part of it, but then you have what server version you're on, what security settings are set on that virtual machine you're running, what environment variables need to be set. You know, the list goes on and on and on. So imagine that maybe Angular was right up in that container, right there, with nginx. And imagine that I made a little manifest list of what goes in that shipping container right there. Well, now, couldn't I drop that container off at your port, we'll call it, and you could then, if you had Docker, run this container. Now imagine that maybe that container is one of your microservices or just one of your RESTful services that we have. Well, we could also run that type of setup. And then you could even host databases if you want in containers, which is you know, one of those things, some people do it, some people don't, but is absolutely an option. Now we use, at my company, we use containers for everything. If you hit codewithdan.com, nobody can spell my last name, so I had to simplify it. That's actually, there's around 8 containers running on codewithdan.com. We have nginx, we have some Node, we have some ASP.NET Core, we have Mongo, we have MariaDB, we have WordPress, and these are all containerized. So I literally could get my site, which is not super complex, I'll admit, but there's enough to, you know, be dangerous with it, up and running on your machine in as fast as we could download the images we're going to talk about. And everything would be ready to go, and you could do full-on development against real servers. And that's what's so cool about this. I'm going to show that in just a moment. So what is Docker then? Well, it's basically a way to build, ship, and run your software. It makes it a little bit easier. So it provides this shipping container system that we're going to be talking about here. And what's cool about it is it runs on Linux kind of natively, but it also runs on Windows Server 2016. So if you are on a Windows-type server, you can do that too. Now, as a developer, as I've already mentioned, if you have a Mac or Windows, either way, or Linux, by the way, of course, it actually came out of the Linux world, then you can run this as well. So the way it works is when I just ran the little microservice demo I did earlier with Angular in it, I had multiple images. So one of those was an nginx Alpine image. And this is the nginx static file type server. I had another one for ASP.NET Core. I had another one for Node.js, and then some databases as well. Now what we do is we take those images, which is really, you're going to see a layered file system, and we use that to make containers. So Angular can now run in one of these containers and be 100% self-contained, ready to go. So an image is really just a read-only template that we can build. And I'm going to show you how we can build a custom one here with an Angular app in just a moment. And then a container is going to be the actual runtime instance. And I kind of think of it this way. It's almost like the image is sort of like it's the blueprint, almost like the class. And then the runtime instance, which is the container, is almost like newing up, you know, creating a new instance of that class. Really what a container is the image plus a little readable, writable layer. I call it the frosting of the cake up on top. But this is actually what runs like in production or staging or even local. So let me show you an example here of doing this with Angular. So I have another project, and actually I'll come back to that guy in a moment. Now this is a really simple kind of demo app I have for a video course thing I do, but let me go ahead and open a terminal here. And normally we would do ngserve-o and launch the app, right? And we can do that. There's nothing wrong with that per se. But I can do this, actually. First off, if I just type Docker, because I have Docker CE installed, I'm going to get access to all these commands. Now, the good news with Docker is this, if you scroll through it, it feels a little overwhelming at first, I'll admit. But this particular list of commands, there's honestly about 5 of them that you actually use really frequently. So now, before you leave today, I do need you to memorize all this, though. You can't go to Harry Potter otherwise. I don't have them all memorized. I use a handful of these. So what I can do is if I type Docker, I can get the kind of help, or I can even do Docker-H and get the help. But I can do this. I can say Docker pull nginx Alpine. Now this is a very, very small version of nginx that runs on Linux. And it's in this container. Now this is an image. This nginx Alpine is an actual image that we have. In fact, let me zoom that just a little bit for the back row there. All right. And I've already run this because I can never trust the internet, but when you're doing this. So it should say it's up to date. Okay. So what this just did is it went out and compared my local image to what I had remote and said, hey, has anything changed, anything newer? Because I didn't say which version to get, which means it's going to grab the latest. Now, you got to be careful with that. But that's what we could do. Now, I'm in the folder for the Angular app, and normally I would do ngserve and all that, but let me go back to the code real quick. And you'll notice I have the dist folder ready to go that ngbuild would do. Well, wouldn't it be cool if I could do live development against my Angular site, but with a real server? And even have real servers on the back end for my RESTful services and things. You know, not just these kind of faking it, which faking it works, but at some point we need to try it out for real. And we can do that. I'm going to close this guy real quick. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do, I just pulled this, and now if I do Docker images, you're going to see a list of images here, and here's my nginx Alpine. It's about 15 meg. All right, that's the entire image that I can now use to run this app. And what's so cool about this is I can now run just a little command to run the server and link it from the container, which on Mac will run in a Linux a VM. And then you can do the same thing on Windows, or on Windows, not with this image, but with others, you can run Windows containers as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, hey, Docker, I would like to run this nginx Alpine, but I want to link the container server to my local source code so that when I actually develop, I'm developing against a real server here. So what I'm going to do is run on port, I'm going to say just 8080. This is my external port we're going to hit in the browser. This is going to get forwarded into the container port, which is 80. Let me zoom that a little bit. And then from here, what we're going to do is create what's called a volume. And this is basically an alias that nginx, there's a certain folder it looks for the code. But I don't want it to look in the container. I want it to look at my local machine to actually do this. So I'm going to create what's called a volume. And I'm going to point to my current working directory. That's kind of an alias for my current working directory, which is this Angular 120 dist. Now, I'm going to link that into the container, what nginx needs. And this is usr share. We'll hope I get this right. I actually have a cheat sheet I can refer to. Yep, I got it right. And then what I'm going to do here, let me zoom out just a little bit, is now I'm going to say, what image do I want to run? And I'm going to do nginx Alpine. All right. So what we're now saying is, hey, Docker, I have this image called nginx Alpine. I would like to run it on port 8080, but I want to forward to 80 because that's what the container is actually running. It's kind of like you open the shipping container up and everything in there is on port 80. So 8080 forwards to 80. And now I'm going to link my current working directory to the dist folder, and that's going to be linked up to this usr share nginx HTML. So I'm really creating an alias from the container back to my source code. All right, so let's go ahead and we'll run this, and it's just going to sit there. Now, I'm not running in what's called detached mode. Right now, I'm kind of locking up the console, but you can run in what's called detached mode. And now I'm going to go back, and let's try to hit localhost 8080. And there we go. So this is the simple Angular app. Now, it is a self-contained app. I'm not calling anything external. It just relies on some JSON files, but it's a good start. And it has sorting and all that normal filtering type of stuff. So typical Angular app. But I'm literally just pointing a real-life server to my dist folder to make this work. Okay, now that's cool, but watch what happens here if I refresh. All right, 404, not found. Why? Well, because it's looking on the server for a /customers. There is no /customers on the server. So it errors out. You know, we typically have to set up a redirect. Now, the ngserve command does this for us, but in a real-life app, you have to have something that knows how to redirect back to the SPA homepage. Well, we're going to fix that. All right, and that's going to get us in the next part here. So let me go ahead and stop this container, and I'll show you how that works. So this is all kind of the container logs. All right, so I'm going to run another command now. It's called docker ps-a. And this will list all my containers, running or not running. They give them these funny aliases, and there are some funny ones. I did a video once, and I actually had to edit it, because let's just say it wasn't an appropriate alias they generated. But anyway, see this ID right here? Well, what we can do is we could say, Docker, I want to remove. Now, it's already stopped. Let me show you over here. See how it exited? That's because I exited the console. Had I done detached mode, we wouldn't worry about that. But I'm going to say remove, and then what was it? 1C. You can just do a couple characters. So we'll say 1C. All right, now if I do docker ps-a, no containers. It's all gone. All right, very cool. So that's kind of how I could now work locally. Now, there's a little trick to this, though, if you do it. And if you do a normal ng build, it normally blows away the dist folder every time. It deletes it, and then you'd have to reset up your container. There's a nice command line switch. Thanks for the CLI guys in the room, because this was one of the issues I reported a while back, and they added this command line switch, so it's awesome. It's called DOP, and I'm going to say false. This is, what is it? Delete output, what is the P now? My mind went blank. Path, thank you. I was going to say folder. I'm thinking DOF, you know, but yes, path. It's path, yes. Yeah, delete output path. And you don't normally need to worry about this one, but in this case, if I set up that container, I set up that volume, and if it keeps deleting the dist folder, it messes up the container communication. So this is how you can still develop locally with your builds. Nice command line switch there. Okay, so the next step of this is let's talk a little bit about what we can do to move on from here. So now that we've seen a little bit of the local development, how would we actually get our code in the container to ship it off somewhere and do something with it? Well, this is where we create something called a Docker file. This is just a text file that we can use, and this text file will be used to build, and we're going to build an image. Now, I use the off-the-shelf nginx Alpine, but I can create a custom version of nginx Alpine that also, when you open up that container on the ship, I'm going to throw my code in there as well. And that's what we're going to look at here. So the way it works is this. This is a very simple one, but I'm going to say from nginx Alpine, that's my base image I'm going to use. I'm going to create a label because you have to know who to blame, so now you'll know. I'm going to copy the dist folder into the USR share nginx folder. I'm going to expose port 80 and then SSL port 443, and then that entry point is basically the commands you run to start up nginx. It would be different if you're using like Tomcat or Node or whatever. You know, it'd be a different command there. All right, so what we'll do then is we'll take that Docker file and we'll build it. And you do that with a docker build command. Now what this does is says, I'd like to tag it, and then this Dan Whalin here, this is my repository. This is my image name. I'm going to call it ng_nginx, and then this is a tag name. Now the tag name's super cool. Containers can be versioned. So now if I ever have to roll back to a different version, it's there. I could just run that different image, and I'll show you how to actually identify the tag name here. All right, and then I'm going to say dot just means, hey, my Docker file is local, wherever I'm running this command. That's our build context. Then we could just do this. Now notice there's no -v here. And that's because in this case, the code is in the container. So now when I ship it and drop it off in staging or somewhere else, it's all ready to go. I don't have to do anything else. All right, so let me show you an example here of doing this real quick. So let me go first off into this project, and you're going to notice there's a Docker file right here. And here is the from nginx Alpine, and notice the copy command right there. There's a custom configuration. That's going to have the redirect, by the way, to redirect to my index.html, so I don't have any broken routes. And then there's my copy. Now notice the working directory is that nginx path. So the dist is my Angular code, and I'm going to copy it in here. So I'm actually just going to steal a command I have to speed things up a little bit. Paste this in, and I'm going to run a build now against this Docker file. And this will just take a sec to build. All right, now I talked about it's a layered file system. So you'll notice, say, step 1, step 2, step 3. Every command becomes a layer in the file system, and then that layer will end up sitting on top of the VM you run. And just to clarify, containers are not VMs. Totally different. You can run many containers on one VM. So that's what's really cool about this. Now, from here, I could say docker push Dan Whalin, nginx 1.0, and we can now push this. It's probably not much different than what I already have up online already. It's not. You'll see layer already exists. It's very smart in detecting what's already out there versus what did you just build. Well, what's already out there is identical. I haven't changed any code. So in this case, it said, I don't have to do anything. But this just pushed up to a site called Docker Hub, or in an enterprise environment, you could push this to a local repository if you wanted. Okay, so now what do you do, though? Well, the last step of this is now we need a way to run the container. So let me pop this up. And I use Azure for pretty much all my stuff, but you could use Azure, AWS, Google Cloud, Oracle, whatever. And what I can do now is go into some type of service that knows how to work with containers. Now, keep in mind, if you're local and you don't want to use the cloud, not a problem. You just need to run the Docker command to pull down that image, and then you can run it on your local server. Now, the reason I'm going to show Azure here, because they have this dead simple way to get a container or multiple containers up and running. It's called Web App for Containers. So I'm going to go ahead and try to load this guy here, maybe. There we go. And then you can give it a name. I'm just going to make up a name really fast here. I'll just show you. So let's just call it that. I won't go through all this part. I have a little trial thing. And then I can configure the container. Now, this is the cool part. I can pick from Azure Container Registry, Docker Hub, a private repo, if I have one, all those type of things. And even with Docker, I can pick a private repo, so nobody else can get to it. Now, mine's public. And now I would type in the nginx 1.0 tag, hit OK, and then I would hit create. Now, I'm not going to do the create because I already have something running. So I'm going to show you that because it'll take a few minutes to just fire up the first time. So this is an actual running container. It's the exact same container. And this URL here, in fact, this is a very small VM. I didn't go all out on my cost. But you can actually hit this right now. At least we should be able to. ng-nginx azurewebsites.net. And then, of course, you can even hook up a custom domain to it as well. And there we go. There's the same exact app now running up in the cloud, and I could move it to your machines. I could move it anywhere I want. So to wrap up here, it is time for coffee break. When you go to the cloud, there's a lot of options. The one I used was this web app for containers. Super easy to do, literally as easy as I just showed. And then you're up and running. So if you're interested in playing with this, I have a whole bunch of code up on GitHub that uses Docker and Angular. So a lot of these will have not only Docker, but you'll see some Angular stuff in there. That Microservices one I ran, if you read the README, that'll help get you started. I also have some courses. If you're a Pluralsight subscriber, feel free to check out Docker and Angular there. And with that, here's the link to get to everything. Thanks, and have a good coffee break.
All right, it's 11 o'clock now.